Hello everyone, Reza here. In today's video, we will cover Power Automate approval flows for SharePoint document libraries. We will leverage the inbuilt content approval feature for SharePoint document libraries, which allows us to add true security to our documents. The documents will move from draft to pending to approve or reject, and we will add Power Automate approvals to this content approval feature in document libraries. So let's get started with the video, but first, my introduction. In SharePoint Online, I have a document library called Invoices. And as part of this document library, I have added a few columns: invoice ID, customer, and invoice amount. Simple metadata associated with the document that the user will upload. Now, as part of document libraries in SharePoint, there is a feature known as content approval. And for that, if I head over to the settings of my document library and go to library settings, and I will head over to versioning settings. And in versioning settings, the first feature that we have is called content approval. And by default, this is turned off for a new document library. I will go ahead and enable this. And what content approval provides is it specifies whether new items or changes to existing items, that means documents, should remain in a draft state until they have been approved. So if a user uploads a document, the content approval status of that document is draft. Only that user has access to that document because it's in draft state. Then the user can publish the document so that the status changes to pending, and the approvers can then come in and either approve or reject it. If it's approved, everyone gets access to it and can see that document. If it's rejected, the content approval status in that case stands rejected. The content approval feature closely ties in with the document versioning feature as well. And by default here, I have the create major versions turned on. Now, if I have this feature turned on, any document that gets uploaded into this library, automatically the content approval status would be pending. So it will not go into a draft state. If you want the draft feature to come in, you would have to ensure that you have the major and minor version settings enabled. In my scenario, I will turn this on. So two things: require content approval, yes, and create major and minor versions, yes. Once I'm done with this, I will click on OK. I will head back to my document library, and right here, you will notice a new column has been added to my document library, and that column is called as the approval status column. Bear in mind, this is an inbuilt column that gets added as part of your document library the moment you have that feature turned on. Now, this feature closely ties in with the security of my library. So once again, if I go to settings, library settings, and if I look at the permissions for my document library, these are the three groups that have permissions to this library: owners, visitors, and members. These are standard SharePoint groups. I can stop inheriting permissions. I can add my own security. I can add my own groups. In my scenario, currently I'm logged in as Reza, and Reza is in the owners group. So Reza basically has full control. Now, as part of that full control permission, one of the permission in it is to approve items, and that is related to the content approval piece. So that means an owner in my case has the access to go ahead and approve or reject items. On the other hand, I have my members group here who have edit permissions. As part of my members, I have two users, James and Sarah. So they are members who have edit access. They can contribute to this document library, but as part of the edit permission, they do not have the access to approve documents. I also have a group called visitors, and these users can only read the content in this document library. So they cannot add, update, approve. They can only read the content that has the content approval status set as approved. So back to my document library, let me go ahead and upload a file. So I will upload a file to this library, and the moment I upload a file, I would like you to check out the approval status associated with the document that I just uploaded. The approval status is draft. Now, as the user who's just uploaded this file, I can go about making changes to either the content of the document, or I can go and make changes to the metadata associated with this library. So for example, I have my invoice ID. I plug in my invoice ID. I have my customer name. I'm going to tag this to RD. And I have my invoice amount. Let's say this is $5,000. Once I'm ready to begin the approval process for this document, I can straight away go select this file. And right here on the ribbon, I have this option called Submit for Approval. So I will select this. And now the approval status changes to pending. That means the approval process has started. Now Reza's account also has access to approve or reject. So right here, if I select this document again and go to the three ellipses here in the ribbon, I have the option right here to approve or reject. So if I select this, right here, I can decide the status of the approval. So I can view the document, view the properties, and I can either approve it or reject it. In this case, let's say I'll just go and approve it. While I'm approving it, I can also put in my comments. So my comments are, this looks good. I will click OK, and my document status now changes to approved. If I select my document, go to the three ellipses here and go to version history. Remember, versioning has been turned on. So every time a change is made, an action is taken, all of that will be logged as part of the version history. So right here, I can see all my details. Now next, I will go and upload another file. And this file that I just uploaded is currently in draft status. Now I'm logged in as user Sarah into that same document library. What I want you to observe is I do not see that second invoice. That's because that invoice is currently in draft status. I see this invoice because the status of this invoice is approved. So everyone who has access to this library, minimum read access, can see that document. Now if I log back in as Reza, I have the option here to submit this for approval. So let's say I submit this for approval. It goes to the approver. The approver is Reza again. Reza goes to approve, reject. And this time, let's say I reject this. And I plug in my command that this is missing metadata. I click OK. This information gets logged. The status changes to rejected. Back logged in as Sarah, because the status is rejected, still Sarah does not see that document. Sarah should be able to only see those documents if they are truly approved. Now this is true for any other user who has the same access as Sarah. Here, logged in as user James, James also only sees that one document because James is in the members group. Now once again, sign back in as Reza. Once you enable that content approval feature in your document library, you also get a few new views. One of the views is called approve reject items. So if I select this, this will show me all the information of the approval status along with those approval comments that I was entering before. There is also something called as my submissions, wherein I can see all the information that I have submitted. So these are two really useful views that you can leverage straight away out of the box. Now back to my all documents view here. This document was rejected because of missing metadata. So once again, I'll go to the details, plug in the information. The moment I make a change, observe the status went back to draft because I made a change. That means I need to submit it for approval again. So I'll select this, click submit for approval. The approvers can now come in. select, go to approve or reject and take their decision, enter comments. So I'm going to say it looks good now, click OK. The status changes to approved. Logging in as Sarah now, because both those documents are approved, Sarah can see both those documents. Sarah changes to approve reject items. She can see the status of the documents and the approval commands right here. Now I will go ahead and add a document as Sarah. So Sarah now just uploaded an invoice document. Once again, bear in mind, the status is draft. Any other user logs into this document library, for example, James will not even be aware that such a document is existing. This is true security in SharePoint. And once again, when Sarah is ready to begin the approval process, Sarah can submit this for approval. The status goes to pending. Sarah is not playing the role of an approver. So Sarah does not even get that option for approve or reject. That's because Sarah is not an approver. Reza on the other side is an approver. So Reza can select the document that Sarah has submitted and can take a decision on the approval process right here. So here Reza says rejected because there's missing data. I'll click OK. The status stands rejected. And Sarah now can see that the approval status here is rejected. Sarah can change the view to approve reject items and can see the comments of the approver right here. So now that we've seen what content approval enables for us in a SharePoint document library, let's see how we can leverage the power of approvals in Power Automate to tie in with this content approval feature. So to create that approval flow, I will head over to flow.microsoft.com, go to create, and I will create an automated cloud flow. Right here, I will click skip. In the connectors, I will select SharePoint. And one of the triggers related to SharePoint is when an item or a file is modified. Now, why am I selecting when an item or a file is modified? That's because the moment someone uploads a document, the status is draft. They would have to go ahead and click on that submit for approval to basically begin the approval process. And at that time, it's like modifying the file. And that's why I want to select the right trigger. So my trigger is when an item or a file is modified. I will pick my site. I will pick my library, which is invoices. Next, I would like this flow to trigger when an item or a file is modified, yes, but when it is modified and the status is pending. When an approval decision is taken, the status will change. It will change to approved or rejected. If the file is in draft, the user can still make modifications to the file. They can go in and change the metadata. In all those cases, my flow will trigger. But that's not what I want. I want the flow to trigger only when the file is modified and my approval status is pending. So for that, I need to plug in an expression. And this is the technique that I typically use to grab that expression. I will go to new step, head over to compose. So in the compose action, I will select right here and I get this dialog that opens up. So I will go to expressions and this is where I will plug in my expression. Now I want to check if the content approval status column has the value pending or not. So for that, I will use the following expression equals, open up the brackets. My first object would be dynamic content. So I'm clicking on dynamic content here. And from my trigger action, I have dynamic content that says content approval status. So I'm going to select this and this will now plug in the expression right here. So equals the content approval status column dynamic content. And at the end, right before the closing round bracket, I'll put a comma. In single quotes, I will put the value pending. This is case sensitive, so make sure you have this value entered correctly. Once I have my expression complete, I will click on OK. I will click on this, which will open up the expression dialog. I will copy this, go to the trigger, go to 3 ellipses, go to settings, and right here at the bottom, we have the option for adding trigger conditions. I will click add, plug in the expression that I copied, and at the beginning of this expression, I will add the @ symbol. So make sure you add the symbol and then your expression. Once you're done, just click on this button called done, and this will plug in my trigger condition. So currently my flow will trigger when a file has been modified in my invoices document library and the content approval status is pending. I don't need this compose action now. I just added it to grab that expression. So I will go ahead and delete this. Next, I need to start my approval process. So for that, I will go and add a new step. Search for start and wait for an approval action. Select this. And here I can define my approval scenario. So I will pick the approve or reject first to respond. So the first approver to respond, their decision will be considered final. Here I can plug in a title for my approval. I've plugged in text that says invoice approval for. So right here, let's say I search for the name of the document. So I can plug that in right here. Assigned to is where I can define who my approvers are. Now in my scenario, I only have one approver, which is Reza, who's a part of that group. So it's pretty straightforward for me just to go in and plug in or hard code my email address right here. So I've just selected Reza. In the details, I can put in all the details related to this approval. For example, I can plug in the invoice ID. I can plug in the customer value, and then I will plug in the invoice amount. So these are my details. I can also provide a link to the item. If I search for link, there is a dynamic content property called link to item. So I'm going to pick this, and the description for the link will be the name of my item. If I go to show advanced options, I can even define who the actual requester of this approval was. Select the modified by email. So basically the person who last modified that document, that person would be the requester. I will enable notifications. I'll enable reassignment. I can even upload the document right here as attachment content. So this completes my approval action. Now, of course, I've hard-coded Reza here. If I go to my document library and if I go to library settings and permissions, my approvers are my owners in my scenario, and I could have more than one users here. So what if I want to assign the approval to all of those users? You can do that. I have done a video on this where you can dynamically grab the email addresses of the users from a SharePoint group. I will plug that video link in the description of this video, so do check that out. So you can easily grab them and plug all of your approvers right here dynamically. Once I have my approval action complete, I will go to a new step and add a condition. And in the condition, from dynamic content of the approval action, I will pick outcome and check to see if the outcome is equal to approve. That means if the outcome of the approval is approved, in that case, it will go into the yes branch. If it is rejected, it will go into this no branch. So if it is approved, I will go ahead and add an action and search for content approval. There is an action here called set content approval status. So that special feature in SharePoint document libraries that I turned on, you can actually set the content approval status as well using this action. So I will pick this action. I will pick my site address, my library name, which is invoices. The ID of my item will come from my trigger. And here now is the action. This action is those same options that the approver gets in SharePoint, which is change it to approve or reject. Now, because in my case, I'm relating this to the flow approval. If the flow approval is approved, I will change the content approval status of my document to approved. And here, I can also plug in the comments that the approver puts in through my flow approval as my approval comments. So for that, I can just straight away go and pick responses comments. Now if I pick this, it will add a for loop around this. It's not a problem because my approval action is first to respond. I can even go and pick the entire summary of my response. So what's the response? What time did they take their decision? I feel this is powerful in terms of the data points that it provides. So I will just go ahead and pick the response summary and put it in the comments. So this completes my setup, but there is one important thing that is still pending, and that is E tag. And this E tag is required for files and pages. Since I need that E tag, and if I select this under dynamic content, if I search for E tag, I don't have any dynamic content that gives me that. So we have to add one extra step, and that step I will add right before this condition. I will add an action, search for SharePoint, select the SharePoint connector, and there is an action here called get file metadata. We need the actual metadata of that file. So I'll select this. Once again, it's asking me for the site address. I'll select my site address, and it's asking me for the file identifier. So under dynamic content, I will search for identifier, and right here I get it from the trigger, so I'll pick this. Now if I go back to my condition and go to my content approval status action under E tag, if I search for E tag in dynamic content, the get file metadata action will give me that information. So I will select this, and this now completes my content approval status action. Next, I can also go ahead and send an email to the user who started this approval process. You can go to add an action, send an email, send this to, I will select this advanced mode, and under dynamic content, pick the modified by user's email. That's the user who has triggered this process. In the subject, I can say that, so the invoice has been approved, and in the body of this, I can provide all the details of the approval process, and that I can directly get from the response summary of the start and wait for an approval action. So this now completes the yes side of my branch. That is if the approver has approved it. What if the approvers reject it? So in this case, I'll just copy this. Do not reinvent the wheel. Go to add an action. Go to my clipboard and paste it right here. So here's my action again. This time I'll just change the status from approve to reject. I will copy the email action and paste it right here as well. Go to clipboard, paste it, and here instead of approved, I will change this to rejected. So the response summary has all the information of the response, the approver name, the approver email, the response decision, the time at which the response was taken. The only thing missing is actually commands. So for commands, under dynamic content, I can go straight to responses commands, select this. It will apply the for loop here, and you can do the same thing for the no branch as well. I can just go and pick the responses commands. So this will also apply the loop here. I will call this content approval for invoices. I will click on save. And once my flow is saved, we are ready to go and test this out. So logged in as James, here is the invoices document library. James goes and uploads a file. So here's the invoice that James has uploaded. I will go to the details and add some of the properties here. So customer is Contoso. So James goes ahead and updates the properties here of the document. The status is draft. No one else can see this file. Once James is ready to start the approval on this file, James can select this and click on submit for approval. Now, when James hits submit for approval, that flow that we created will trigger. The status of the approval is pending. Our flow should trigger if the file is modified, which it is, and the status is pending, which it is. So right here now, in my flow run, I can see that my flow has triggered. And the flow now has stopped at the start and wait for an approval action. And this goes out to the approver. The approver in my case here is Reza. So here's Reza signed in to Outlook. Here is the approval action that Reza gets directly in Flow. Here is the subject of the approval action that says invoice approval for invoice number so and so. That's the name of the document. I can see who requested this. It was James. I can see the date and time this approval was created on. I have the link right here directly to that document, so I can just click this and it will straight away open the document for me. Right here, I can see the details of the invoice. I have the other details right here that the user filled out, the invoice ID, customer name, the invoice amount. And right here is where Reza can take the approval decision of whether Reza would like to approve this or reject this. In this case, I'll approve this and say, here's my comment, invoice is in order. I will click on submit and this now will straight away log the approval action for me. If I quickly head back to the flow, we can see that the approval decision came in. We went and grabbed that E tag from get file metadata, then went into the condition. Condition was to check to see the outcome of the approval, which was approved in this case. So it goes into the yes branch. We set the content approval status and send the user who started the approval process an email that this invoice has been approved. So logging into the mailbox of James, here is the approval email that James has received. And here is that approver response summary that I sent across in the body of the email. So approver Reza, here is Reza's email. Here was Reza's response. Here was the requested date of the approval. And here is the date that the approval was responded to. All that information is there in that single dynamic data property called response summary. Now if James goes to that document library, here is the invoice that James uploaded, which is approved. And if I switch the view over here to approve reject items, we can see the information right here. We can see that this was approved and here are the comments. And the comments is all the information, who the approver was, what was their decision, when did they approve it. If I enlarge this, I can see all that information right here in one go in the approver comments. If I log in as Sarah, Sarah is also a contributor in the system, not an approver. Because the document that James uploaded just got approved, Sarah can see that information right here. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching.